So, Invincible. You've seen the show.
Pretty sure.
And now I'm a bit late to discussion, as you obviously know, but better late than never, I suppose. Now, this sort of character conflict intrigues me and so many other people, not only because of the thought-provoking nature of said character conflict, but also because of how Invincible deals with the hero/villain sort of morality. Because Invincible approaches the common conception of heroes being these all-powerful, all-morally righteous icons of vigilantism, kind of like Superman, who is quite literally the embodiment of justice and hope, and killing would contradict all that he is. Perhaps Batman, who believes that killing him would put him down to the very level that he's fighting against in such a conscientious and intelligent way, along with what he is known best for, that being contingency plans.
Justice League is far too dangerous to lack a failsafe against any possible misuse of our power.
Goku as well, even though there's some exceptions to my boy Goku, but he's still someone who always sees the good in people regardless of the circumstance, and will always fight for protection of his loved ones. But in any realistic sense, or portrayal that hopes to be realistic, this isn't the case, like, at all. As the real world comes with so much nuance and such a jungle of morality and opposing ideas in conjunction with the limited capacity of people's scarce abilities, to the point that even attempting to solve all the world's problems single-handedly is a foolish endeavor, obviously. And even though Invincible is a god amongst men, he's still an immature adolescent, far removed from an actual god. We're not going to understand why this is the case with heroes, as they are typically marketed towards children and exist within fictional confines that the author decides from start to finish. These stories just fulfill a narrative of a vigilante doing what's right, with rare times of genuine insight into these characters and their given morality. And so Invincible actually uplifts this misconception and handles these very nuanced character moralities in such interesting ways, whether it be the gay couple struggling to make ends meet, or Powerplex crashing the fuck out and literally charring his own baby.
What the hell?
You're a monster!
Even with Invincible killing Yᴏᴜ'ᴜ that I'll get into here shortly. Which brings us to Invincible Season 3, Episode 2, which is perhaps the second greatest episode, Behind the Conquest Fight.
I am so happy. All the other Viltrumites love me. Everyone talks to me. Everyone wants to be my friend.
Mark lands on the Pentagon to confront Cecil about his usage of rehabilitated monsters after the Doc Seismic fight. That fight saw 90% of the world's fighting force against any anomalous threat captured and almost killed. Mark is well within his right to voice his problems within a calm manner, but as you saw, that got sour pretty quickly. Cecil argues back and forth with Mark while walking him to the quote-unquote white room, pointing out that Mark is a hypocrite and attempts to call Cecil out due to him killing people as well. And both stand on the same foundation, that is of course saving people, and each of them have gone through extensive lengths both morally and physically to do just that. Just Cecil being more practical and grounded in his approach to doing so. But before they enter the aforementioned white room, with Cecil justifying bringing him there due to his reasonable fear of Invincible, he warns him 16 different times to go home before Mark gets ahead of himself.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16.
He approaches Cecil with a INVINCIBLE coming out of nowhere to apprehend Mark, Cecil telling him to calm down as he gets more hostile. As Mark gets more hostile and approaches Cecil, Cecil then uses a trigger to activate a device implanted inside Mark's head to subdue him as he flies outside of the Pentagon. But with all that being said, who's really in the right? Now I want to make this video with some sort of depth, so I'm going to give a detailed summary of both of their respective viewpoints. First off, Mark. Mark was raised as a regular human up until the age of 17, to which he got his powers. He was socialized and taught to be a regular human, and the result of that being that he views himself, although intuitively, as a normal human. He hasn't had the time to learn how to conduct himself as a superhero, something many other characters in the show and outside of the show had the lifetime experience to doubt themselves to. Characters like Gohan have had that time to adjust to the godlike powers they possessed, and subsequently learn how to integrate into society with that in mind. Even with Mark's simple view, it has its little share of nuance, and so he can't really apply it himself. As much as I love Mark's character, his philosophy is one nearest to a hurt, overly optimistic teen with little moral knowledge.
Stay out of my way. Nerds.
He can accomplish just about anything, he can do just about everything, and is quite literally a fucking demigod. Like, come on, he took a D1 fucking ass lashing from his dad and walked that shit off within a week, for Christ's sake. And I really love Invincible, really. I can say I relate to him on a personal level on many aspects. And I don't just want to give a one-sided view, so his philosophy isn't in any way as deep as Cecil's, but is more or less a rigid no-kill policy. He regularly conflicts with his brother on the topic of doing so, even criticizing him for killing 2 blue evil-ass motherfuckers. Of course, shout out to my boy Oliver. Mark also has to deal with the psychological aftermath following him killing Yᴏᴜ'ᴜ, or maybe not, we'll see. And just the simple fact that his dad is a mass genocider, strengthening his belief in abstaining from killing. This is all compounded by the responsibility that he carries due to him being the literal strongest force within this part of the galaxy, with only recently earning his high school diploma, as well as the constant reminders of the lives he's affected indirectly with his power, i.e. Powerplex. That being said, Mark has the best of the world's intentions at heart. He truly wants to save everybody he loves and be the Earth's protector. Remember how I mentioned the traditional vigilante stereotypes before though? He's immature and he's hit with an impossible reality which I'll elaborate on later. All in all, Mark is such a powerful person with the fiery spirit of someone who desires nothing but good in the world, but reality has a different tale for him. He has many hardships that would break even the hardest of men. I don't have to continue to glaze this goat to really state his true power, but he's powerless against such few entities and is physically unable to solve all the world's problems through means of punching. He's still a goated-ass hero, just an extremely flawed individual in tandem. Which brings us to my even bigger goat, Cecil. Now before the cold and ruthless Cecil we know today in the show, he wasn't always like this. He was once a principled GD agent who had an empathetic will to do good. He's essentially the inverted version for all that he stands today, and in many other ways, he also embodies Mark's current philosophy. This takes us to Cecil's full encounter with the force of the freeing fist. One fateful day, he was tasked with intercepting their plan to detonate a bomb full of gas that would quite literally melt you from the outside in. They were going to spread this gas across the surrounding city and potentially the mainland of the entire United States. Once Cecil discovered the bomb in a basement of a clothing store, he got jumped by Knucklebuster and Force Fist, who both made up the force of the freeing fist. Cecil, however, had given a code through his handheld radio, and the shop was swarmed by federal agents. But before they could come in to arrest or kill the force of the freeing fist, they had activated the bomb. Cecil, reacting swiftly, trapped them alongside the bomb within the wooden container that was holding it, of course sacrificing his own body. Fast forward a couple weeks with a few super secret government sewing techniques, and Cecil is back at it and still alive and kicking with only a piece of his normal skin left, a cruel reminder of his sacrifices. The Pentagon is then suddenly raided by another villain I'm too lazy to find the name of. An injured Cecil makes his way down the halls of the Pentagon with the former director of the GDA who is also injured. The aforementioned villain is mere feet away, lunging at an injured Cecil before a rehabilitated Knucklebuster and Force Fist comes in to tackle and kill the villain. An outraged Cecil sees these monsters and nails each of them right in the forehead with a .45 caliber, stating that he will quote-unquote,
I don't work with criminals. Not even if they're...
He's then taken to prison to face some sort of punishment for killing those who wronged him most. Here we see Cecil mature and materialize in the prison block's main boss, so to speak, establishing a sort of orderly community between everybody there. We fast forward to Cecil being called to a meeting with the former director of the GDA, Radcliffe. He makes a proposition to Cecil to become the new director of the GDA. Radcliffe also makes many remarks on Cecil's ability to lead and bring order to something that otherwise was absent. Cecil initially declines his offer, feeling wronged and understated by Radcliffe. Radcliffe then makes more comments on necessary sacrifice, much to Cecil's dismay. After bickering and Cecil's stubbornness, Radcliffe walks out, but before he fully walks out, he says to Cecil, you can either be the good guy or the guy who saves the world. You can't be both. From there, Cecil takes the job of director after considerable growth and maturity. It's clear through Radcliffe's plot device that Cecil undergoes a radical shift in his philosophy and attitude. Cecil then assumes a utilitarian/consequentialist worldview out of necessity to keep the world functioning within this fictional setting. His view is thoroughly nuanced in his character development up to this point. But now for the long coveted question. Who is right? But first, I quickly want to go over the respective morals. Mark is sort of a morally intuitive response to Cecil's respective moral worldview. He doesn't really offer a principled approach or a sort of rebuttal to Cecil's worldview off-rip in his character, which is understandable. He's young and hasn't had the experience to develop his rigid moral code. So I don't really label this character conflict as a sort of deontology versus consequentialism episode 5867 to the power of 10. Because A, he doesn't really have any principled reasoning, or at the very least doesn't apply them very well at all. And B, the clash in the show is more of a character growth device for Mark. But like I said at the beginning of the video, Mark was entirely justified to get angry at the violation of his bodily consent. There's absolutely zero argument otherwise. Mark was however not justified in getting hostile or building up tension before the fact while Cecil was walking him to the White Room, even after Cecil said he was genuinely scared of what Mark could do. Cecil's worldview on the other hand is more complex, fortunately, as he offers a sort of utilitarian viewpoint, but I disagree with the label of utilitarian. You see, the thing is that separates him from a pure utilitarian is that he hates himself regularly for making the decisions that he does.
I can't do that, Debbie.
Why not?
Because I can't. Nolan killed the Guardians. He killed Donald. He shrugged off everything I've thrown at him, and now I don't know if Mark is with his father or against him. So I can't call off the one thing that might stop them both.
This is why I have always hated you.
That's why I hate me too.
He also doesn't attempt to morally justify his actions or view them as absolutely ethical and moral, unlike Mark, hence the quote before about being the good guy or something like that. He also isn't concerned with the happiness of individuals outside of making sure the world and its liberties exist safely from these fictional threats. So in short, unlike usual utilitarians, Cecil isn't concerned with the general happiness of individuals or societies that make up those individuals, just as long as society exists safely. Survival of humanity is his primary directive and both his bottom line. Cecil concedes that his methodology cannot perfectly assume the mantle of ethical and perfectly good whilst achieving the same perfect ends, as that's kind of the whole point of his character growth. He makes sacrifices in the decisions he does out of a pragmatic survivalistic necessity, not so much out of a moral type of necessity. Cecil's far from being a purely good ethical character, but he's also far from being a monster in his own right. He doesn't regularly send people to their untimely deaths in hopes that it'll eliminate a certain threat. He also does everything within what is crucial to humanity's safety and well-being from his perspective. But now to the actual battle philosophy. If we isolate Cecil's actions from the context that they took place in, it's pretty easy to understand why he's wrong. Betraying Invincible's bodily consent is an absolute ethical nightmare for anybody to attempt to justify. If I compared the two in a vacuum, Cecil is definitely wrong in this aspect. Yet if we had context, it makes a lot more sense to understand this feud. Cecil made the grave mistake of trusting Nolan before he crashed the fuck out and almost brought Earth down to its own grave. Why would Cecil ever make such a mistake again? Cecil saw the world to a standstill and only survived because Nolan was the first Viltrumite ever to experience empathy, one of the most powerful Viltrumites at that. Sure, Cecil handled the situation with Mark as stupidly as he could, and he did it the most wrong and demeaning way possible. And sure, Cecil did do something unethical to Mark. Cecil effectively ruined the relationship between him and the Earth's strongest defender. Those two are undeniable truths. But is being ethically correct here enough to say one is right over the other? Pure utilitarians might agree for a different reason, or might not in certain sects, but I think being ethical in this situation is kind of irrelevant. Cecil shows that being good, i.e. practices that are morally correct and purely ethical, are not possibly able to be achieved whilst producing equally good outcomes. Pointing out that Cecil's wrong in his treatment to Invincible is basically just paramount to agreeing with him. Cecil doesn't attempt to make a moral argument for his actions and considers his actions to be immoral or gray at absolutely best. He even hates himself consistently for doing so, as I previously discussed. Cecil's hit with impossible realities just like Mark is within his universe constantly, from the supernatural to even the extraterrestrial, and he takes means of similar nature or associations to provide such means that are morally ambiguous to achieve these ends, such as utilizing D.A. Sinclair's techniques. Regardless if you agree with utilitarianism or hate it, you can still see why being moral in this certain situation doesn't really matter while analyzing why either are correct. Mark, on the other hand, doesn't seem to apply his belief that people are able to change to DA and Darkwing. It's an even bigger question to discuss whether rehabilitating criminals to do good is even wrong in the first place as a sort of restitution. He doesn't even seem to apply his beliefs to his own life. He'll forgive his mass genocide dad and fight by his side regardless of the extreme circumstance on his side of the story to survive. Like Cecil, Mark will and has gone back on not killing people when it meant it hurt people closest to him. Mark is simply just too hypocritical and thoroughly embedded in his self-righteousness to really even admit this fact. Mark doesn't really have any moral high ground despite that being the major crux of his own side of the argument. Mark also tends to care more for his loved ones than to think about saving the world as a whole, as is his job as a superhero. Now, before I give my ultimatum on who's really right, I want to go through the major events that bolster or diminish either side of the argument. First, Cecil was absolutely fucking justified in the White Room. Mark came into his office as a superhero and slammed his hands on the desk demanding something be done. He was the first one to initiate aggression when he walked in and refused to leave when he got emotional. Second, Cecil was incredibly stupid in his handling of the situation and used his only failsafe as the second line of defense and their extremely short skirmish and subsequently lost half the people on his team. Third, implementing such technology beyond Mark's will was not justifiable outside of these special events, and yes, Mark is valid as discussed to take it up with him ad nauseum. Even if we throw the consequentialist ethic outside of the window and assume that he is entirely wrong, being ethical in this sense does not matter. Cecil shows that good ends aren't always achievable with good means, which is why he accepts it with a healthy dosage of self-hatred to even take these means. 4. Mark is absolutely hypocritical. He wants to claim that he's better than Cecil or that he has any right to demand something like an entitled child. He acts like his case for killing Angstrom or failing to do so, which results in some pretty horrific consequences, is somehow different in regards to Cecil's employment of bottom feeders. He also dances around with his ethic of allowing people to change and choosing on who to apply it to. 5. Lastly, D.A. Sinclair and Darkwing. Darkwing is a pretty open and shut case. Darkwing was pretty much brought to insanity by the effects of Midnight City and the death of his original mentor. He had killed the pettiest of criminals because of such insanity, and Cecil gave him the chance to rehabilitate himself. And there isn't much implication to Darkwing's brain chemistry being altered by outside means other than his own free will. Sinclair is a bit of a toss-up, but his case really isn't an issue to Cecil's credibility. I mean, is it really bad to rehabilitate someone who has a genius better than anybody on the planet to commit himself to the betterment of mankind? Is it really right to say that rotting in a cell is a better punishment? Even viewing that outside of a utilitarian perspective, it's quite easy to see what Cecil is doing as restitution as is for Sinclair's crimes. Even if we assume Sinclair is being altered by some sort of super secret government technology, it doesn't meaningfully change the conversation. Are murderers' rights even valid after stripping dozens of other lives? Of course not. In the end, this dilemma is very morally nuanced. I'm not making an argument for why either has the high ground morally. If I did, Cecil would just win that argument outside of a meta-argument for Mark due to him actually having a ground to stand on. Cecil was, however, always right in what it means to be a superhero. Mark never could really truly grasp Cecil's worldview, believing that Cecil is a monster for what he has done. It doesn't really matter how justified his Mark is emotionally, because that's the problem. Mark isn't mature enough to wield the position he does, but he's the only person with the modicum of power to actually do so. He only really locks in when somebody close to him gets hurt. Mark regularly holds back in situations in which he shouldn't, which results in more people getting killed than otherwise. He holds back against Lula to the point where she could have easily speed blitzed him and took him out. He holds back against Angstrom, a multiversal threat, until he dared to touch his mom. He even held back in the first bits of the Invincible War and with Conquest before he pushed his limits upon seeing Conquest torment Oliver. And in many ways, the Invincible War proved Cecil was right. It may have been after the fact, but the Invincible War proved what a much weaker Mark was capable of. The only way Earth even survived the Invincible variants was because they had zero coordination with each other and they opted to just do damage. It had also proved that Cecil's methodology and rapid response was one of the only other things that kept humanity alive other than Invincible himself. This whole single event single-handedly showed to Invincible why the world needs Cecil for protection and why his view is right, regardless of his moral in these circumstances. Mark, in conjunction, couldn't realize that being a hero requires moral and physical sacrifice to the highest extent and ignored and pleaded that he was right when he was ultimately backtracking. Mark is unable to genuinely apply his morals when truly pressed. Conclusion being, Cecil is not only right by Mark not giving an adequate challenge to his beliefs, but Mark also being a hypocrite, causing more deaths than otherwise by simply dealing with threats other than holding back, but also his initial aggression to Cecil and his morally righteous hard-headedness. Mark even continued to press Cecil when he made it abundantly clear that he was terrified shitless of Mark.
Darkwing and Sinclair don't have your abilities.
Abilities I only use to help people.
Who are you helping right now? You see things one way and you won't make room for any other viewpoint. You threaten people who disagree with you.
I don't threaten.
No? Because you're scaring the out of me right now.
Nonetheless, Cecil is vindicated time and time again in Ultimate Reflections. When shit hit the fan, Cecil is the first person Mark yelled out to give him aid when his girlfriend got two-pieced by Master Roshi's clone. Cecil may not be the most ethical or perhaps even the smartest in this, both of which are irrelevant in this hyper-fictionalized setting. When you're constantly being vindicated in your beliefs, and the only other person to challenge your moral system is being embarrassed all the time, it's pretty safe to say you're right in your fucking approach. With all that being said though, I can finally end this rest of the video. Thank you for watching and please stay tuned. Goodbye gang.